Buenas noches and good evening, everybody. My name is Liz Fernandez. I am the Job Fair Administrator. I am delighted to welcome those of you that are viewing this webinar live and those of you that are listening to it after the fact. Regardless of where you are, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to remind you that the NYSAIS Job Fair to Promote Diversity is scheduled for Saturday, February 22nd from 10 to 1 p.m. at Columbia Grammar and Preparatory School. And tonight's topic is specifically a discussion about the overview of the hiring process. I do want to say that if you are listening to this panel, I want to encourage you to also take a moment to listen to some of the other workshops and webinars that we've offered during the month of February. Because while this one specifically speaks to the hiring process, every single previous and tomorrow night's panel and next week's panel all speak to directly and indirectly the hiring process as well. And there's different information. So I encourage you to make a small investment of time, listen to them as podcasts if you would like. You don't need to view, although you might want to see who is on, and truly take notes. There's some wonderful kernels of wisdom being offered by colleagues throughout New York who are serving in independent schools, many of which are previous job fair candidates. And with that, I want to set up tonight the overview of the hiring process. We have three panelists who will introduce themselves in a moment. You may notice that one panelist will be joining shortly, and as soon as she does, then we'll just fold her right in. For the most part, I know that the panelists that we do have already joining us are able to speak to all school in addition to specific divisional roles, and we can all speak to teaching positions and administrative positions. So there is a variety of perspectives that you're going to get. Every division is going to have perhaps a different approach. And I encourage you to take some notes. And if you have specific questions, please put them in the chat. Thanks to those of you that provided questions ahead of time. I look forward to posing them to our panelists. And without further ado, I'm going to invite David and Ophelia to introduce themselves. They already know that I will say their name in an order so that they know which order they will respond in. And I'm going to invite you to introduce yourselves. Where do you work? In what role? How long have you been where you are? What type of school is the school that you work at? And then also indicate what type of hiring you are primarily responsible for. Is it a particular division? Do you also participate in all school? Is it primarily teaching? Is it primarily administrative roles? And with that, I'm going to invite Ophelia to go first and then David.
Thank you so much, Liz. Thanks for having me here. My name is Ophelia Ma. I am the head of middle school at the Browning School. We are a K-12 all-boys school on the Upper East Side with about 450 students. This is my third year in this role as head of middle school, and 3 years ago when I was conducting a semi-national job search for a head of middle school position, I was a candidate for the diversity job fair at NYSAIS, and I watched some of these videos, especially the one that talks about transitioning from teaching to administration. It was incredibly helpful. I received a lot of good information and feedback on that, and so I'm really happy to be coming here and giving back. I am responsible for hiring teachers in the middle school division for the Browning School, but have served on many hiring committees for administrative roles and K-12 roles at my school. And at Browning, we have a fairly standard hiring process where it's there is similar protocols across the board. And so I can go into a little bit more detail sharing that with you later on in the panel. Just really happy to be here.
Good evening, everyone. My name is David Thompson, pronouns he, him. I currently serve as the Director of Equity and Inclusion at the Trinity School, a 1,000 student K-12 all gender 316-year-old school with an Episcopal tradition and a chapel program. And within my capacity here, I am responsible for leading specific administrative searches, and then I participate in the hiring and evaluation process for department chair positions, as well as most teaching positions across the three divisions. And I usually will participate or support the interview process for other positions that might come up, administrative and the like. So most candidates for most positions at our school will interact with me in some way, and if not me, someone from my office. Uh, and our hiring process is, I think, pretty standard. There's certainly no magic touch to the way that folks can seek us. We work with a pretty broad applicant stack resource, so everyone would apply through the same platform regardless of the position, and then the hiring manager is the one who is able to sort through based upon pretty standard criteria. And then I can certainly go into further detail from there as to how we narrow down and make selection.
Thank you so much, David. Brenda, it's wonderful to see you. My apologies for the difficulties with the link. We're so glad you're here. Both Ophelia and David have introduced themselves and spoken a little bit about the school, where they work, their role, the type of place it is, if they've been a previous job fair candidate, any sort of thoughts about their experience with these webinars in the past, if they have been a previous job fair candidate. And then what I've also done is I've just given you the order that you would speak in. So you are our third and final panelist. So I invite you now to introduce yourself. And then once you conclude, then I'll give you all the next question in your order. Again, thank you for joining us, all of you.
Yes, and thank you so much for having me. My name is Brenda Daniels, and I serve as the Elementary Division Director at Corlier School. Prior to that, I was at the town school as a learning specialist. I've been in my role this is my third year at the school, and we're a progressive school. We serve children from ages 1 through 10. And we support them through the outplacement process to go to middle school as well. So my role primarily is to supervise the teachers in that we're setting goals together, and we are having mid-year reflections right now where we're thinking about those goals, checking in on where we are in order to think about coming years, whether or not they'll continue on with us. But again, we're a progressive school, and we're located in Chelsea. And is there anything else you wanted me to speak to, Liz?
We are good. We are good. Thank you so much. So each of you can speak to different divisions, and several of you mentioned that you also participate in some of the all-school roles and hiring primarily with administrative positions, which of course makes sense. I'd be curious if each of you just spoke a little bit about how your schools are approaching the hiring season. And by that, I mean specifically what you are thinking about in terms of reviewing resumes, and are you doing Zoom interviews? Are you doing Zoom phone calls to be able to do those initial screens? Anything along those lines would be really helpful. You know, are you inviting people in near the end? What does the structure look like? And before, as you're all thinking about that, let me set the stage for our listeners. At the job fair, there will be over 80 schools that will attend, and there will be tables, and you'll have lots of information that you get. If you pre-register ahead of time, you'll get the name of the schools and the type of schools, location, etc. On the day of the job fair, you will have an opportunity to approach a table because they've posted a position that might be of interest to you that you'd like to pursue. Or you know a particular school, and while there may not be a position that's particularly of interest, you just want to make sure you stop by because you know the school, it's proximate, you're an alum. You know, lots of reasons why people approach schools. After the job fair, everyone returns back to their schools and they start to share the resumes with each of the divisional representatives or whoever is running point on the particular positions. From that point on, what happens? So now that I've set the stage so that everyone knows what to expect, what happens? And I'm actually going to start with you, Brenda, and then go to Ophelia, and then David, so that we do our youngest, then our middle division and upper division. And if I have something to add, I can certainly add sort of more of an all school.
Okay, great. Certainly. So I can speak to that. As I said, we're in the process of having mid-year reflections right now, and how that helps us is it helps us to determine who will be returning, who will not. We're doing intent to return at the moment. So right now we are in the stage where we're not really sure how many positions we have open at the moment. We are hopeful that we'll be able to retain as many staff members as possible. But once we have a better understanding of where we are in terms of needs for different grade levels, then we'll begin to collect the resumes, we'll review the resumes. We always have a hiring committee, and so that committee works together to make sure that the person or the people who are being invited in for the interviews, that they fit their criteria for the role, whether it be having a master's degree and being certified in whatever grade level, or if it's a learning specialist position, having a special education background. So once we review the resumes, we have our hiring committee, and we bring those people together to review the resumes, and we begin to invite people for a phone screen. And that's one of the first stages where you're interacting with some of the staff members at the school. It could be any member of the hiring committee who conducts the phone screen. From there, if the candidate continues to be a strong candidate for the role, we would invite them in for a demo lesson where we would ask the teacher, the prospective candidate, if it's a teacher candidate, to do some sort of a demo lesson with the class of about 30 minutes. That person would then meet with the hiring committee, where we would engage in a small group interview with the teaching candidate. And from there, should the committee agree that the person would be a good fit for the role, then we would do reference checks, where we're calling the references and asking a set list of questions to make sure that we're treating each candidate equitably. So that's really a rundown of our process. And I should have mentioned before that I was a job fair candidate. And so I went through some of this process before. It was not for a teaching role. It was a little bit different because it was a learning specialist role. But again, there was a hiring committee, and I met with several staff members and had an opportunity to observe in classrooms as well.
Thanks, Brenda. Ophelia, if you could note what is similar and just gloss over and then move into what might be different, that would be great.
Awesome. There's a lot of similarity between our hiring processes. At Browning, it's a big hiring year for us because we are actually growing from a 1 building facility to a 2 building facility. Our upper school is moving into a new campus. And so we have 10 openings on our websites right now that are all new roles, and we haven't posted the roles that we are replacing yet, and so there will be additional roles that we will post. So we're very excited about all the new bloods that will come into our community. So for us, we actually have 3 rounds for our hiring process. The first round is a phone screen. The second round is a Zoom committee interview, and the third round is an on-campus visit, where for teaching positions you would do a demo lesson. For admin position, there's usually some sort of a performance task. And if you are a job fair candidate, your conversation with us at the job fair would count as the phone screen. So even if the person that you spoke to is not the hiring manager, we usually, if we make a recommendation to the hiring manager for teaching positions, typically department chairs at the middle school level, then they would advance you to the committee interview, typically automatically. And our committee interview is a job history interview. And so usually you are expected to walk through all of your jobs, but for people who are really, really experienced, then three most recent positions. And we talk about kind of what were you hired to do? What are some of your accomplishments while you were there? What feedback did you receive? What are ways that you grew? And then why did you leave? And so those are some of the questions that we ask in the career history interview. And then one of the things that we're looking for the on-campus visit is obviously the quality of the demo lesson, but also your reflection after the demo lesson. So in the committee interview after the demo lesson, you are asked to debrief, think about what went well, what didn't go according to plan. And then the committee member will also offer some feedback. And the way that you respond to that feedback also tells us a lot about who you are as an educator. So those are just some things to pay attention to. Um, oh, and then we would do reference check, similar to what Brenda was sharing.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's actually, the point about the job fair piece. I've not been a job fair candidate, so I don't come through that experience, but I have worked so closely with not only NYSAIS, but with other job fairs in seeking to fill positions. I think one of the really beautiful things about a job fair is that it offers a chance to really sort of talk through and talk with people who might not necessarily know to go on the website and follow all of those steps. So I think it really does open the door to a number of folks that are not often immediately on the radar. And I think right now there's a candidate that I met last year at the job fair who was interested in a position and just wanted to connect. And we still, although that person was not hired for the role that we had, me and this person still engage pretty regularly. We check in, we have coffee, because I think that there's really sort of a really powerful relational piece that can come from that. And one of the pieces of advice I want to make sure that I offer to anyone listening to this is that it's the one time in life that I ever want to engage with paper, and I'm only speaking personally. I don't know if everyone else feels the same. But when I begin to explain our process, you'll understand that when you come with a paper resume or something tangible, it actually just simply allows us to take notes, to say, oh, like had great conversation about like teaching philosophy or shared alumni experience, whatever it is. Because when we get back to school and we begin to share our information, our experience with hiring managers, it just helps us remember like, hey, this was the conversation and this is why there's someone to talk to. The reason I say that is because our hiring process, especially for upper school teachers, goes entirely through our like resume management system. I refer to it as AppStack, but it is the server that is linked on our website. So every candidate who is interested for a position should go first to our website in order to upload their materials that way. And it just sort of becomes a world of resumes that are sorted by the positions that they're applying for. And that is also our funnel, our CRM, our management system. And so that's where we take notes. And so that's why I always say bring the resume with you so that that information can be added when you are ready to apply, if you apply. The processes seem really similar across divisions. For us, I think it's important to acknowledge that in the upper school, especially teaching positions, they're always run by the department chair. And teaching philosophy is going to be what emerges in the Zoom interview. So typically there's a screen interview, depending upon the candidate, the timing, there'll be a screen interview, maybe with the department chair, maybe with someone on the committee, a quick phone call before it goes into a Zoom meeting. And that Zoom meeting is often with committee members. And that is where your teaching philosophy, your reasons for teaching are really important to come through. We really do pride ourselves here at Trinity as being like an intellectual institution. And so we just want for our teachers to be exhibiting that from every stage of their interaction. And it's from there that there is discernment around all of the other pieces, whether or not it's educational background or work background. We will hire people with various levels of experience, whether that be professional or collegiate. There are some cases just coming out of grad school, depending upon that journey. So there's really a variable experience, but what matters most in the Zoom is teaching philosophy, and what will matter most in the in-person interview will be the engagement with students during the demo lesson. on. So how do you turn that teaching philosophy into something that is observable, into something that the students can speak to? And our students are the biggest critics ever. Like, they are lovely and they know that what they want in a classroom. And so in some ways it's impossible to predict as much as it's to know that that is really going to be the thing that stands out for so many of us during that in-person full day interview with 2 teaching demos. Um, yeah, and I think from there, similar to what Ophelia said, there's a feedback process during an in-person interview for our upper school. That person is going to meet with every adult that they will possibly interact with, potential colleague if they were in the role. So myself, often the principals of the upper division, often the deans in the upper division. Occasionally, depending upon availability, they might also meet with the chaplain or with members of our public service or global engagement team. So it's really about thinking of someone with their teaching philosophy that is really able to engage kids, that is thinking about the many ways to engage as a faculty member and advisor in the school. Beyond that, reference checks, similar process for us as well.
Fantastic. So I'm really pleased to hear where there's some similarities and where there are some of the differences. So thank you for that. One of the things that I want to offer, and there are differences between teaching positions and admin positions. For admin positions, depending on the level of the position, some schools use a search firm. And so that's a completely different process. And theoretically and ideally, search firms would guide you through and would be very specific about what their expectations are in applying. I just want to be clear. It is much easier to transition into an administrative role if you are already within the school or you already have some teaching experience within one of the independent schools. So please hear that very clearly. If your goal is administration and you don't have previous experience in administration, I would say do a both and. Really pursue some of those teaching opportunities that exist to make the transition much easier from within. And also certainly go for the administrative positions and then just know realistically that there may be some challenges. For other positions within the school, I know that those clearinghouse or management systems that many of our schools are using ask you as a clearinghouse to put in information, upload information. Pay very close attention to what the positions are asking for. They're likely going to ask for a resume. They're probably going to ask for a set of references that will not be contacted unless and until you advance and it is noted that you are advancing and they're going to contact references. And the third thing that is likely requested is some sort of teaching philosophy, educational statement, something along those lines. Often they are asked, schools ask for candidates to upload them all in one PDF file so that it's one doc. Let's remember that in this fast-paced world, many of us who are reviewing resumes may be reviewing resumes on the go. So we're on our phones. We're not necessarily on computers. And when we have everything in one doc, it is much easier for us to quickly skim and read. So it's actually a service and it is a convenience to the people who are reviewing and deciding if in that period of time they want to pursue coming back to your resume and thinking about what happens next with you. I'd be really curious, during a Zoom process, what is an absolute avoid? Do not do this on a Zoom. Do any of you have any definitely don'ts?
I don't know if this is Zoom specific, but I think that if even if it's true that the current place of employment for you is not a good fit and there are challenges with that environment, the way that you talk about your current place of employment really, really matters, right? I think whoever is managing a hiring process, if they are sensing a lot of negative energy, a lot of you may not want to talk as directly. You might want to represent the challenges that you're experiencing right now in a diplomatic, thoughtful, uh, a compassionate, understanding way. And you also probably do not want that to be a big part of your interview, right? That should be mentioned if asked, and you wouldn't want to linger on that topic.
I think I want to add to what Ophelia is saying with regard to, I will call it like the screening flag as opposed to like Zoom or anything else. Like it's often, at least in my experience, something that will prohibit maybe an advancement. And so similar to what Ophelia is saying with regard to how you speak of your current school really mattering, I think the assumptions that you make of the school that you're applying to also matter. I certainly have engaged with folks in an interview process who will say things like, "Oh, I know schools like this," or like. And I think that the presumption of assumed understanding of institutional culture can also be a bit of a red flag because and the reason is it questions whether or not a person can be sort of like coachable or supported. I think it begs the question of, well, what would it be like if this were a misunderstanding? Like, how quickly would one be willing to take the time to pause and learn rather than assume they know?
Great, great suggestions. What are some things that candidates should avoid during an in-person interview? Any definite, don't do this, it's not going to serve you well, that's different perhaps than the Zoom interview? Although, I mean, in the examples that you both offered, it would make sense both in person and Zoom. I'm just wondering if there's anything in particular for the in-person that you think of as a definite avoid. Brenda, what are you thinking? What's a definite avoid for you?
You know, something I've heard and I believe to be true is the importance of just having a sense of the type of school you're applying to, and how you should dress for that role. Because I have heard that a person, if it's a very progressive school and people are wearing jeans, that it may be off-putting if you are too professionally dressed. So I'm not saying to show up in ripped jeans or anything like that, but I do think that it's important to have at least a very basic understanding of the culture and how people present themselves in the school. And I think that that will help the interviewers have a sense of whether or not that person is a good fit for the school.
Ophelia, anything on your mind? Oh, David, I see you.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to hear from Ophelia if you have anything to add.
Go for it.
I would say, especially when I think about the upper school teaching positions that we have and that I've worked with, I would avoid coming in to teach a lesson that you haven't discussed with the hiring manager. And again, like I said, typically it's the department chair. Because I think what we would hope for a person coming in to do an interview and demos is that they're able to either support or supplement knowledge that the students already have. And part of doing that is I've seen people come in and say, oh, I've got this banger of a lesson, and like they just run through it. And I'm like, well, this isn't the book that they're currently reading, or like they don't know this reference. I think the advice really is like avoid assuming you know what you want to teach without having the conversation first.
Yeah, I think mine has to do with kind of interactions with students as well. I think, um, generally in a school environment, you are looking for mission fit, you are looking for ability to build rapport with students, you are looking for thoughtfulness in your lesson design and just like a genuine kind of engagement and curiosity about the student, right? And so, yes, you are there to give a demo lesson and you may have a plan, but in those casual moments, how you interact with the student as they were coming in or as you were doing the campus tour are also things that make an impression, you know? And if you interact kind of negatively with the students during that time, that's definitely a big flag.
Thank you. I'm going to add that when you are coming in person, anticipate delays. Some of this really seems like common sense, and I also know that common sense is rare and it bears repeating. Anticipate delays. Anticipate that you're going to be asked for some form of identification. Every single school will ask you for some form of government issued identification. So that, should be an expectation. Please be comfortable in your attire because this may not be the day to put on a new pair of shoes and try to break them in. You have no idea how much walking you're going to be doing. And I offer these as really practical tips only because through the years, trust me, I've gathered, the tried and true what to do and what not to do moments. Remember that everyone that you encounter at your school is part of the process. So the person who is part of campus safety that is asking you for an identification is part of the process. The person who has been communicating with you, often an administrative assistant, who is communicating with you about your time of arrival, your schedule, do you need any photocopies? I always say to candidates, come prepared with everything you need. It is very kind for a school to offer to make copies for you. You may want to know ahead of time if you should have the copies and what materials you'll have in the classroom. Certainly, if you are thinking about a tech lesson or a lesson that involves technology, have your plan B and C because you never know. And also ask questions like how many students are in the room and, are their desks fixed if you want the students to move around and huddle in smaller groups and things like that, because it'll be much harder for you to pivot when you're standing and the nerves are participating in your demo lesson moment. I'm curious if you each could speak to, we've heard about the importance of student engagement. What else, when you are observing a demo lesson, are you looking for? And do you ask for lesson drafts ahead of time? And what should a candidate anticipate if they are? How should they put it together in a format, etc.? David, I'm going to ask you, Ophelia, and then Brenda.
Yeah, I think, Liz, your point about checking in advance is huge because for our searches, what is needed in advance of a class is going to depend entirely on the department that you're applying into. So different department chairs are going to ask for different things. And so I want to just make sure that that is known. And I also think about the format of our classrooms, like they are going to vary based upon the subject and quite frankly, just simply the building that the classroom is assigned in. And that's a space issue that every school has. So something to really think about when we're sort of observing in a classroom is your willingness or a candidate's willingness to go off script, but to come back. I think especially in high school when students are asking questions or they're trying to make connections or, they have some sort of like funds of knowledge that come from a different source, you might be in the middle of trying to communicate a thing and you might know in your mind exactly where you want to go. But I think your ability to pivot, to respond to the moment at hand in order to get back is really, really important. So it's not just that you're liked and smart, but that you actually are able to really think about classroom management. And something else that I'm looking for, something else that I know we look for is is quite frankly like the ability that you have to recognize that there are diverse students in the room. If you are someone who is really trying to do a lesson where you're calling on a lot of students who maybe have their hand raised, like knowing that you are giving some level of balance to students based on gender, or based on identity, or finding ways to engage the quietest student in that room. I know that we are often nervous to be disrespectful to the child who isn't engaging, and we want to be mindful of extroversion bias. But I think just simply the way that you are able to think about who is participating in that lesson beyond the student engagement, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think David, you hit a lot of the points already. I think, it cannot emphasize enough, make no assumptions, ask the questions about what kind of lesson. Because usually schools, especially when we're doing a lot of hiring, we don't want to interrupt the existing curriculum. And so we might give you a topic that is a part of seventh grade science, so that you can continue and build on what the teachers had already taught them the day before. And um yeah, so on the demo lesson front, we do not ask for a lesson draft. And at the middle school level, we are looking for the way you structure your lesson, and we are looking for ability to use classroom management strategies and even things as proximity as a classroom management tool, hand gesture, a little tap on the desk, like even little things like that are being observed in the lesson. A teacher who is comfortable in a classroom should be able to engage with those things. Um, um, as they interact with students. We are also looking for ability to differentiate. And even if you are not showing that in your lesson, kind of talking about ideas for how you might differentiate as you get to know these students, sorry, will be really important. Um, yeah, and then show us the best of kind of what you've got, like if you are someone who's really hands-on, create a lesson that allows the students to participate. And if you are someone who is really able to kind of draw them out and engage with them in a critical thinking dialogue, have those elements, and for middle school, the pacing of the lesson is also really important, right? So you don't want to just have one kind of activity from beginning to end, but things that scaffold and build on top of each other, and then naturally leads the lesson to kind of the instructional goal. And then we also always ask you about kind of assessment, like throughout the lesson, what are you looking for as cues for yourself to know that the student has mastered the concept that you're trying to teach them? And you need to be able to identify that and talk about it in the lesson debrief.
So similarly to what Ophelia shared, we don't require lesson drafts in advance. However, I always appreciate when it is in advance or if they have it in hand, because it just shows a high level of preparedness and it helps me to really follow along when I'm observing the demo lesson. Something that I really appreciate during the demo lesson that I always look for is whether or not the candidate sets expectations with the students at the very beginning of the lesson, after introducing themselves, of course. But it's just very important, especially on the lower school level, that you're able to set your expectations for the classroom, whether it be, please remember to raise your hand if you have something to say, or to raise your hand if you need to get out of your seat. These little things are very, very important, especially on an elementary level. And the other thing that is really, really important is just the ability to build rapport quickly with the children. Are you interested in getting to know their names? Did you ask to have name tags created in advance? I think those are like the little nuanced things that make the difference for candidates, because it shows that you really care about getting to know the children. Because as we all know, when you're teaching children, you're teaching them the content, but you're also getting to know who they are and helping them to develop both socially and emotionally. So that's really, really important. I think Ophelia also mentioned pacing as well, making sure that students aren't sitting on the rug for too long. I can only speak to elementary at this point, but we know first graders, they need to move from the rug to the desk. Are you able to anticipate that and plan for that in your demo lesson? And just overall, are you able to maintain their engagement? And in my school in particular, it's a very racially and socioeconomically diverse schools. So are you able to teach to a diverse population of students? And then most importantly, all things important, but I also just want to highlight, are you able to accomplish the goals that you set at the beginning of the lesson, or what you hope to accomplish with the students? Are you able to actually get there, or is it just kind of like a filler activity? I like to see that there's actually a goal that you meant to reach and you're actually able to achieve it for the most part.
Excellent suggestions. I'm curious, after the demo lesson, when you're doing the debrief with the candidate, what are some of the questions that a candidate should expect and be prepared to respond? Ophelia, I see you're ready to go.
Yeah, I actually want to ask, add one tiny thing. So if you have handouts, make sure that you make extra copies so that every observer gets a copy of your handout. Yeah,
Great
just one
suggestion.
tiny little thing. Yeah, so the kinds of questions that we asked during a demo lesson debrief would be how did you prepare for the demo lesson? What were your objectives? Did you achieve it? Like what Brenda was talking about. We might ask a candidate, how did you feel like your lesson took into account the diverse background of all the students, and see if they can articulate whether they're planning for engaging with students of different backgrounds and different identity. We ask them what they would change if they do it again. And we might ask questions about individual students and ask them to kind of make observations about who stood out to them and how they might try to engage them, or curiosity they might have about a certain student. We might ask about, we always open it with a question on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the lesson? And then explain why they gave that rating. Yeah, I'll stop there and hand it over to the other panelist.
Anyone else want to add?
Sure, I can jump in. I always like to ask, what might you do differently? It's important for me and for the hiring committee members to see that the candidate is really reflective. So, a great teacher, no matter how great the lesson is, hopefully is going to go back and think about what may have been done differently. So that's always at top of mind for me when I'm interviewing or debriefing with the candidates. And also, how did you differentiate for the students? Did you notice any struggling learners? How did you support that student during the lesson? As well as next steps, what would you do tomorrow if you were to come back?
Yeah, and like I said, a lot of our questions are going to be either specific to subject or about teaching philosophy. So I'll talk about some of those teaching philosophy questions that are often asked in person to pretty much every candidate, depending upon who you're meeting with and what order. But you could expect to be asked about your favorite teacher. That is a question that I know is really common. I think a candidate can expect to be asked about their favorite blank to teach. So, within the context of the department, your favorite book, your favorite math theorem, your favorite period in history, and why. Really sort of trying to find this moment where the knowledge that you have and the way that it intersects with like your experience in a classroom just makes you light up. I will often ask for a teacher to reflect on a moment where they felt really seen, within a classroom setting. So depending upon, some people share stories from lower school. Some people share stories from their second year teaching when they made a really, really big mistake. And a question that you can probably be assumed to ask is really about a moment where like you messed up. Like tell us about a time where you just got it wrong. And how did you kind of grow from there? But those are four questions that I can say with firm confidence almost all candidates will be asked when they're visiting.
Thank you all. I want to note that teaching positions there are multiple people coming in. They always involve a level of committees. Our schools love committees. They love collaborative opportunities to be able to see someone in action and engage with our candidates from multiple perspectives. So definitely expect to be hydrated. Expect to have snack if a meal is part of your schedule for the day. you may or may not be able to eat, so make sure that you have like a power bar in your bag, and going from point A to point B, make sure that, you know, you nourish yourself and you stay ready. Whenever, again, makes you may be thinking, well, of course I would. You may not remember, use the restroom and take a moment for yourself to be able to just pause and be still before continuing your day, because they do feel like marathon sessions often. I also want to note that we've had a question, and I'd be really curious how you would explain during the interview process. Someone's perusing a resume and indicates and notices that there's been several one-year positions, so maybe a leave replacement, or you know, something along those. There's an interim position. How can a candidate explain that reality on their resume? What are some good ways to have someone respond to the interim or the consecutive one-year spots?
I'll sort of jump in here because I think what I am also hearing you talk about are like advanced chemistry teachers. They're so hard to come by. Um, and so what winds up happening is that most schools have like one, you know, whatever the position might be, it is typical, you know, at least in my experience, I see this often with higher level subject matter. Maybe they are someone who went to grad school and then were, you know, they did like an adjunct position for a year, and then they were just sort of bouncing between interim roles because there are some teaching positions in schools that are hard to come by and that they are highly coveted. And so I think if you are a candidate who is seeking a position, especially in that particular situation, really talk through how you like, how has your teaching, how has your approach to teaching, how has your approach to the subject evolved over that time? Because most of those one-year interim positions, if it's a leave replacement, if it's temporary in some way, if you fulfilled the full obligation, like you're doing what you were supposed to do. And the idea that we would want to be able to understand is like, how have how has being in different spaces for however many years you have been in different spaces shaped the way that you are approaching the potential for a long-term role?
Thank you, David. Great responses, wonderful suggestions. Anything that either of you want to add before I move on to the next question?
Yeah, I think that when I see someone with a resume with many interim roles, I am interested in how do they participate in these school communities as full members of the faculty. I am interested in the kinds of relationship that they built with their colleagues, and if I see kind of you know, they have engagement beyond their classroom, but they are really invested in the community, even if they are only there for a short period of time. That usually stands out to me as someone who would be a really strong candidate for a long-term position. I would have more concerns actually if I have see a resume where it's not interim positions, but instead full positions that could be long term, but they have many 1 year, and especially if it's not a geographical move, if it's in the same geographical area, if they have 4 schools in a row that they spent 1 year at, that's something that if you are a candidate, you should come prepared to tell your personal story as to why that made sense to you. And if you are able to present it in a way that aligned with the purpose of you, like who you are as an educator and your philosophy and how you want to grow your professional life and your trajectory, if you can tell a really compelling story, then that can overcome, you know, like that resume is not immediately disqualifying, but it is something that you should be prepared to explain.
Thank you. So now let's shift to administrative positions. There is some overlap between teaching and administrative positions, and then let's also recognize that some admin positions that are not at the most senior level, that may be outsourced to a search firm, are managed by the school itself. And so I want to be able to paint an accurate picture for those candidates that are listening that are interested and will pursue admin positions. what should someone do to prepare for the virtual conversation, over Zoom? What should a candidate do to prepare for the in-person conversation that they may have with someone? What are some definites for an admin position that you think are really essential and are really going to spotlight the candidate?
So I think school community, there are many admin positions where people may be coming in and they may be coming from a school, or they may be coming from a corporate setting, or they may be coming from a nonprofit. There are like functional roles, whether it's business office, whether it's administrative assistant, but whether it's something like technology, right? Where your background might not be actually in an academic school type setting. And school community is unique and powerful in the way that every member of staff is a part of the community and we are all here to serve children. And so for our school, one of the things that we have developed is that we have a list of 5 key competencies for a faculty member that we look for no matter what position it is that you're applying for. And for us, those are champion of boys, relationship oriented, purpose driven, justice seeking, and can do collaborator. And they're on every single one of our job descriptions. So if a school has something like that, it means that those are personal qualities that are really important to that school. And you really should read that carefully and think about examples of experiences that you've had, or work that you've done, or action that you've taken, or growth that you've pursued that really speak to those qualities that the school has outlined as important to their community. Um, and so I think thinking about kind of the overall mission of the school and how your particular function can serve the mission of the school is an important aspect that perhaps wouldn't be as important if you are searching for a corporate setting to be an administrator.
I think also just being able to see that that candidate has been voracious in their pursuit of professional development, especially in a position like division head. I do think that classroom experience is necessary, at least from what I've seen in many different situations, because the division heads are working closely with the classroom teachers in support of student learning a lot of the time. So I think it is really, really important to make sure that as you're getting ready to step into a division head or an academic dean sort of situation, that you're showing that you have a growth mindset. I think that's really, really important, and something that could really make you stand out in terms of being ready to move from potentially a teaching position to an admin position.
Yeah, I just want to say too, I think, Liz, like your comment about admin roles is really sort of an interesting one because they're so wide and vast, and a lot of upper schools, depending upon their size, like their upper school like their function like machines, right? I mean, we've got admin assistants, we've got counselors, we've got psychologists, we've got service directors, we've got, I think many schools have any variable roles that fit the need of the institution. And so I think Brenda's point about a growth mindset is huge. Like, how are you adaptable? How are you thinking about change? And I think Ophelia's point about culture and understanding the culture of the school is huge. I think what I would sort of advise, because all of these schools are different, they have different missions, they have different philosophies. I'm not going to go to Browning and be like, hey, have you ever thought about being co-ed? Because like the number one thing there is, champion of boys. So it certainly might allow me to ask questions about like, what do we do with students who are, and experiencing a gender spectrum, like all, those are the types of questions that I could imagine asking, knowing that that is the number one priority or number one quality on the rubric. I think making sure that you are familiar with each school's expectations or each school's values is huge, because I know for my experience in the different places that I've worked, case studies and storytelling become a major part of the admin interview. So whether a person is applying for sort of a role like a division head or an assistant division head, or if they're applying for a role that is not necessarily requiring classroom experience, we're still going to ask about case studies, experiences, and I think that the love of kids is going to be the thing that has to come out. I think because that's what most of these roles are going to expect of us, is to be engaging, or for candidates to be engaging with students all the time. So how have you thought about the life of students in your particular role? And here's a situation in which you might have to juggle competing priorities. What is the first thing that you're going to address, and how do you serve kids in the process?
Excellent suggestions. I also want to add that um, students are often part of the process for both teaching and administrative positions. David, I believe it was you who at the very beginning alluded to, our students know what they want, and they know um, they have very high expectations. And I know that every process that I have ever either led or been part of, I am asking for student feedback. And so don't be surprised if there is student feedback that is being requested at the conclusion of your demo lesson, or at the conclusion of the time that you have spent getting to know the students. And the assumption might be that that would happen for middle and upper school students. I've seen it happen at all ages, in all divisions, and that's an important part of the process as well. As we near the end, are there specific questions that you think candidates should be asking? What are some suggestions? Candidates for teaching, candidates for administration, doesn't matter. What are some of the, essential questions that you think candidates should be asking during their process?
I'll jump in and be quick. I think because all of the in-person interviews that a person is going to have, or actually any stage of the interview, is going to be engaging with someone who has some level of substance in that person's work. Really asking, like, how you, in the role that you're applying for, is someone who supports the work of the person who is in that interview. So especially I think about like DEI director, which is, the role that I sit. There are really important ways that teachers support the work I'm doing, and I think it matters a lot that they come in ready to engage with that possibility.
Ophelia, Brenda, any questions that you would suggest candidates should ask?
Yeah, it's always good to ask about what someone loves about working at a school, at that particular school. That also gives you a lot of information about the school for you to make a determination as to whether it's a good fit for you. Um, you can um, you can ask about kind of the vision and the priorities of the school in the next few years. That gives you a good sense of things that the school may be working on or excited about, possibilities there. And then, like, interviews are also meant to be conversation. And so you do not have to wait until they ask you at the very end, what questions do you have, in order to ask question. If someone makes a comment along the way that you are curious about and want to dig a little deeper, feel free to just ask them right in the middle of that interview as well, and make it just flow naturally.
Yeah, I'm piggybacking off of Ophelia. I believe something interesting and exciting to hear would, be what keeps you coming back, because there's a reason that we come back and do the work every day. And so I would really want to engage with the candidate in thinking about, okay, this is what keeps me here. Is this what you would want to be a part of? So that just shows a high level of curiosity that I believe is really important for, getting to know the school.
I love that question of what keeps you coming back. I add an adjustment to the question. I always say, besides the amazing students, because it's really easy to default to the students, and that's wonderful. Go beyond that. What else is bringing you joy each day that you come to work? What else is drawing you in? I want to remind everyone the importance of, at the conclusion of the day, and the investment of time that you have put forth, and the investment of time that members of the community at the school that you are interviewing at have also invested, that you thank and recognize people in a very simple way. Email has certainly become the simplest way to do so. if you are so inclined, send the email and also send whoever your lead contact person is, send a handwritten note, or maybe you carry one and you leave it with the person who is the last person that you see, often the administrative assistant who, wants to make sure that you get to wherever you need to go. I cannot stress enough how important it is to close the process. People remember how you enter a space and people remember how you leave a space. And it's really important that you thank and acknowledge the people who are investing the time that they are in meeting with you and meeting other candidates, because they really want to bring the very best to the school community. They're investing in a future colleague as well. And with that, we are at the very end. I cannot thank Brenda, Ophelia, and David enough for your insight, for your thoughtfulness, for your commitment to your schools and your willingness to join after working a very long day. So thank you for your time and the gift of your wisdom. I want to recognize my colleagues at NYSAIS, especially Matt, who provided our behind the scenes support this evening, and all of you who have been on with us and who will be listening to this. As always, the job fair, Saturday, February 22nd from 10 to 1 at Columbia Grammar and Prep. Between now and then, I would encourage you to complete the pre-registration process if you have not. The resumes will go live in the database early next week, so you definitely want to be part of that. Number two, I want to remind everyone to please, please, please share information about the job fair. We want to make sure that we are reaching everyone who may be interested in our schools, and social media is one of the best ways to do it, and word of mouth is still the best way. And number three, I certainly want to remind everyone to please arrive by 9:30 at the latest, so that I can talk you through and paint a picture of what to expect. Even if you have been to the job fair before, there's always important moments of little things that are different that are worth you hearing in the morning before you start the entire process. If there's anything else that might be that I can be helpful to you, my email is jobfair@nysais.org. My name is Liz Fernandez. It is a pleasure to support you. I am here and available, and I look forward to interacting with all of you on the day of the job fair, and certainly before and after. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day or evening. Night.